Welcome to Roundtable Decision. I'm your host, Wire Prickenoff, and for today's video, we're going to talk about mass media and more importantly, headlines, and how the mass media uses headlines within their news coverage. And I thought a good place to start would be simply defining what a headline is. And that's simply a heading at the top of an article or page in a newspaper or magazine as defined. But we all know what headlines are. We've all read them, we've all seen them, and headlines are on videos like you see on this video, and they're on other YouTube videos, and they're on articles, they're on everything. We always see headings with every Google search we search in. So instinctively, we know what headlines are. But the way mass media uses headlines is very different than what traditionally a headline is. Like, for example, in school, your headline might be the title of your paper, such as the reasons why the Amazon rainforest deforestation needs to stop, or whatever it might be. That's your headline. And you'll see other examples of that in other places, but there's simply more opinion and more emotion-based headlines within our mass media coverage today. So the good place to start would also be defining what mass media is. And dictionary.com defines mass media as any of the means of communication, as television or newspapers, that reach a very large numbers of people. So again, we all know what mass media is. And when we think of mass media companies, we think of CNN, we think of Fox, we think of CNBC, we think of MSNBC, we think of PBS, maybe BBC. You think of all these things. And then you can define mass media as broader, and you can include like social media into the mass media as a whole. And you can include YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and all these other bases within what mass media is defined as. And again, in today, we know what mass media is almost instinctively. Even as a little kid, you know most likely what mass media is, even if it's in a much vaguer way. But mass media is very biased. And again, we already know that. I don't think I'm surprising anybody by stating that. And the fact that a company like AdFronts Media, what tracks ads within these mass media companies, can track where on the chart you are from your bias level is very, very shocking. And I was just going to pick a few examples out. Like CNN, they have as skews left, while they have Fox News as hyper-partisan right. And this was done in 2016, I believe, and I think they have a newer chart, but this was the only one I could find what has a graphic on it, what I'll link in my video, and you can look at yourself. But in short, I think that CNN and Politico and some of these other sources like NPR are much more hyper-partisan left than they used to be. But then again, they have MSNBC as hyper-partisan, and on the other side, they have Fox or The Blaze media outlets. So again, that's just more of a personal thing, and I haven't really looked into how they track their data because that's not really the focus of this video. But the simple terms and the reason why I wanted to talk about, and you can look at yourself about this mass media bias chart, is because it's rather shocking that this can be shown. Because in original talk about news, like I tried to think of NPR when I used to watch it when I was much younger. The broadcaster, I guess you would say, throughout his podcast would have a very monotone, very factual-based coverage, or at least at the time I thought that was the case. And it seemed very news-like, and it didn't really have much opinions throughout the actual coverage of the event. Nowadays, you can hardly go anywhere without having a news coverage have an opinion within it and not just state the fact. And even more with Trump, you'll have several sources that say that 96% of liberal mass media sources like MSNBC and Fox and CNN have negative headlines to Trump. And that is rather crazy. And obviously that Trump is a very controversial figure, and these companies feel like they can make a lot of money for going against Trump, and that may be just their only focus. But to have 96% of what a president things wrong isn't exactly covering news as it should be, because you know for sure that someone cannot do 96% of things all wrong, even if it's a really, really bad person. But then again, they're entitled to their opinion through the free speech, so it's not like you can judge them too harshly, but it creates a very big problem. And headlines are part of this massive problem, as I'll talk about in a little bit. But I wanted to bring up also an opinion that journalists like who are hired by CNN, and I'm picking on CNN a lot because there's just a lot more information on CNN in particular because they're so hyper focused on coverage against Trump and their headlines and then all their articles and all their videos and broadcasts on the television you can watch from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. It's all negative and it's very predictable. But one of their top editor and writers was caught from faking stories, and I'm probably going to butcher his name, but it's Der Spiegel that got caught for faking news, as I just said. But he was awarded the Journalist of the Year just before, and by the fact that he got caught from faking all his news and fake quotes or fake testimony from people should be rather shocking and should stir up something within people who actually want just news and news by itself. And I'll link an article from Market Watch if you want to look more into that, or if you might have forgot about that happening because it was in 2018. And again, I'm not trying to just pick on CNN because Fox News has also fallen into many traps. And no new mass media news organization is perfect by any means. They're far from perfect. They're all falling into the trap of headlines and trying to get you into their articles without actually telling you what's happening. And that is why it's the failure of news. And I would largely say it's because of headlines and clickbait-driven written articles and written headlines. And again, I'm repeating myself, but it's just rather a simple idea to me. And as I was trying to make this video, I came across the concept of yellow journalism. This was really the start of when journalism was very anti whatever they were wanting to be anti against. And in particular with yellow journalism, it was more anti against like other races. It was very racist as a whole, yellow journalism, and it was very anti-establishment as well. But yellow journalism is defined as journalism that is based upon insinuation and a crude exaggeration. So you can click on images on Google of yellow journalism and you'll see several examples, including one of the more famous examples where there's a printing press and they're printing out all these newspapers. Their printing is the corporation. So the corporation's feeding money into this printing press as it's printing out all these articles to give to the mass population. And the mass population is reading these articles and getting brainwashed by what the corporations want them to believe. And another example is like war, which you'll see a lot of illustrations of it as well. And I'll link the images below in the description as before. But in short, and you can see them behind me as well, but in short, you'll see that they're just over-sensationalizing what certain people look like or certain characteristics of what someone might have. And it was a lie. That was what the journalism was. There was a very, very small truth, but in the large part, it was a lie. And that's what yellow journalism was. But through my discovery of yellow journalism, I found a very good article from Jester. And Jester is a scholarly website, kind of like Google Scholar, where you can read a lot of their case studies into things. But this one in particular was just an article written by someone at Jester. And it talked about how fake news all started with yellow journalism and is being used today. And I'll start reading a couple of parts from their article and then give my opinion of it after. As I quote, "It's hard to argue with the narrative, which has now been backed up by interviews by fake news producers and with the data on spread of fake news stories. In answer to the big question this narrative raises, what now? Jeff Jarvis and John Bothrick have written a terrific piece outlining some specific ways to combat fake news. Fake news print word antecedents. Click journalism has plenty of precedents in the history of mass media, and particularly in the history of American journalism. The history includes a period of journalism so disreputable that it coined a term, yellow journalism, as described by Joseph Patrick McCairns in 1976. The yellow journalism of the 1980s and tabloid journalism of the 1920s. Real quick, we all know what tabloids are, and tabloids are more a complete fake narrative. Like, it's something that isn't even really based on a small truth. It's almost stretching yellow journalism to a much more distinctive way. Like, we all know of the website The Onion, and at one point I remember there was an article about Bill Belichick worshiping like onions in order to win football games or whatever the concept was. And it didn't even have a slight slants of truth. It was very much a article to get laughs at, or to maybe make some very small percentage of the population who don't really know much or believe everything they read to think it's true. Ooh, lights just flickered. Anyway, and I'll go on. In the 1930s, segmented the press of a profit-motivated of cheap thrills and vicious experiences. To its many critics, it seemed as though the press was using freedom from regulation and enjoyed under the First Amendment to make money instead of using it to fulfill its vital role as an independent source of information. And again, he goes on a little bit more about yellow journalism, but basically he was stating that the whole sense of, while journalism has become sensationalized and become very emotional based instead of data driven or factual based, is the corruption of why news is so bad today. And I'm just going to go to the end of the article because it brings up a very good point. And I might make a video just on this article and go really in depth with this whole video topic I'm kind of hinting and bouncing around at, because it is something that rather interests me, and I really kind of want to discover if the concept of headlines and slightly truthful news coverage is actually working in the favor of mass media. And I'm not really sure if it really is. So I might make a full video. But anyway, going back to the purpose of today's video, the article states, what observers of yellow journalism recognize, and what they need to recognize today, is that fake news does not appear in a vacuum. Established media outfits and social networks are not supported by the dollars for clicks they earn by displaying fake news. By fake news headlines. They're increasingly built upon a common culture of clickbait headlines, partisan hyperbole, and a polarization of human interest stories over hard news. We can feel superior for fact-checking what we share and recognizing the difference between true and false headlines, but we are not going to conquer the problem of fake news unless we reject the much broader set of stories, news sources, and websites in which they are suited. The ever-growing slice of online print and broadcast media that feeds us celebrity gossip and in place of actual content. So that is kind of the big point about news coverage today, is that, again, as I've stated, it is not fact-based and not data-driven, and it is more emotional and wanting to draw clicks instead of other sources. And I'm going to, when you go on CNN or Fox News, you're going to have articles and headlines that are very driven by the impeachment trials. But you'll get like articles that say, and this is from CNN, Alan Dershowitz called Trump corrupt in 2016 and said he could be corrupt as a president. Right away, the person's going to look at the headline and probably not even click on the article. And if they click on the article, they're just going to read the first paragraph and get away with what CNN wants them to get away. What they don't realize is that any context around what he said and why he said it. And many times companies, or mass media companies, are so corrupt in the fact that they only want to preach one narrative, that they won't even tell you the context around what that person has said. And I didn't click on the article to really read it in this case, but I can almost guarantee it that CNN's article of Alan Dershowitz is not going to tell you any context around why he said it and when he said it. as much as it should have, to really so you can get a broad sense or a more detailed sense of what actually he meant, more than just a baseline dot that CNN wants you to go away with and everyone to get brainwashed into what they believe. And trust me, CNN's not the only one. I can think of many examples that Fox News uses. It's just CNN's easy to pick on because they're almost too obvious about it. And again, I hope you found this video at least somewhat useful as I'm trying new things with my videos and my channel just to see how it all works. But I might go in a more detailed example of headlines and click on a few and really tell you why they're so hyper-focused on emotions and not facts. But we'll see how this video goes over before I end up making that video. But before I leave, those of you who have stayed, thank you very much. But I also wanted to say that this links very much into what my next video is going to be, where I'm going to talk about a few of my college stories. And I think a lot of my college stories and what my professor and fellow students are saying in my government class are coming from these mass media sources. And they're not getting fact-checked by other news sources. They're just constantly saying whatever the headline wants them to say. And that is a really big problem to me. And I think that it's hard to really change something when it's so overrun. When you go on Google, you see these sources. You don't see anything else. And if you want any sort of national coverage, you have to be able to read these sources. Well, by reading these sources, you're giving into what they want you to believe. And it's not always true, and that is rather aggravating. And I don't really know a fix to it yet, but it's very shocking to me. And I hope that one day I'll be able to think of something. But till that day comes, again, thank you for watching my channel. And hope you like this more kind of free-flowing type of video compared to my others. Enjoy your day.